Color gradients can give a nice depth to your artwork, and let's face it, they're a lot of fun to use, a lot of fun to play with. So Illustrator gives us sort of two different ways to apply them. I have just a plain blank document here, so I'm going to start off by drawing a shape. You could draw any old scribble you like. I'm going to take the pen tool and I'm just going to draw kind of maybe a simple shield shape. And the trick of drawing symmetrical shapes is always to be aware of the Bezier handles and keeping the Bezier handles even and symmetrical. And I'm just using the Option key on the Mac or the Alt key on the keyboard to drag the handles independently of each other. So just by having mirror images, I can draw something like that. Whatever shape you have is fine. I'm just going to stretch this out. And I'll leave it selected. Make sure you have the regular selection tool. And over here on the right, where the panels are about halfway down, is the gradient panel. And just click that. And I'm going to drag this out onto the page so it doesn't snap back. Now, right now, nothing is happening. You see it's all kind of grayed out. To make it active, you want to click underneath this little gradient slider kind of ramp there. And boom, immediately now you have a gradient. And you see, because we had just a plain white fill, this is giving us a default from white to black. Now you could drag these sliders. If I take this white slider and try this, if you drag this to the right, you're putting more white in the slider, so you're putting more white in the object. I'll drag that back. And the same thing with this black slider. If you take this and you drag this to the left, you're putting more black in the object because there's more black in the slider. Now above those is this tiny little diamond, and that tells you where the halfway point is. So if you drag this to the right, there's more white in there, but it's maybe a little bit more subtle. Or if you take this and you drag to the left, and you notice there's more black in here, but it's not solid full black like we had before. It's kind of telling us, again, where the halfway point is. And by the way, you see down here where the location is. That's how you could do it by number. So if I set this back to 50%, type in 50, press enter, now I have that halfway point, the diamond shape, right back in the middle again. But white and black are kind of boring, so we can put different colors in these little sliders. One way to do it is simply double click. Now when you double click, it says, oh, hey, well, that's good. All I have is more black and white. But you have the color swatches. And then let's say maybe I want green on this side, and I'll double click this. And maybe I'll put yellow on that side and double click there. But I find the second way to do it a little easier. Now, here's one reason I drag the gradient panel onto the page. Let's go and grab the swatches panel, and I'll drag that onto the page, and click one of those sliders. And you notice very subtly it's selected. When you have that selected, hold down the Option key on the Mac or the Alt key on the keyboard and click a color. So maybe I'll Alt click or Option click that, and the color gets loaded up. I'll click this one and then hold down the Alt key or the Option key, and now click, and that color gets applied into that slider. If you don't hold down the Option key or the Alt key and you simply click a color, then your gradient goes away and you're simply choosing a solid color. So let me click back in there. But for the first color stop, I want to use a brighter color. I'm going to click that slider and hold down the Alt key or the Option key and click that pale yellow. This is a little easier to see. Now, over here, the type is set to linear, and if you click that, you can see you can also set it as radial, meaning the color starts in the middle and goes outwards in all directions. Here's the center, and it's the same radius on each side. It's a circle. But you could stretch that. This little aspect ratio here, you could dial in a number, or you could click there and make that more of a squashed cigar shape if you want, or you could go in the opposite direction and make it go kind of taller than it is wide. Let me set this back to a narrower, maybe 50%, so you can see it's kind of cigar shaped. Now we can take this angle and we can tilt that at an angle. And you can set opacity. So I'm going to click this slider here at the end, and you see the opacity is set to 100, meaning it's fully opaque. But maybe I want that to fade a little bit. So I can put a number in here that kind of lets it fade out. Now, it's not fading completely to zero, number one, because the number isn't that low, but also I have a stroke on there applied. So I'm going to take that slider and I'm going to alt-click on a green color so it looks a little nicer. And as far as this stroke goes, I'm going to click that and I'm going to click the slash so I remove the stroke. And again, let me just reset one of those colors. And I said there was a second way of doing it. So let me just move this kind of out of the way. And if you take a look on the opposite side of the screen, on the left side of the screen, also about halfway down, is another little gradient. But this is a gradient tool instead of a gradient panel. And if you click that, you notice you get this kind of strange looking assembly here. You have a bar and you have the circle. And this is showing you visually where that gradient is. How is it being applied? Now, one thing you could do is when you put your mouse pointer on this edge, and I'm recording this on a Mac, and if you're in Windows, it's going to look a little different. The mouse pointer is going to look a little different, but really not much. And now I can drag this, and that determines where I'm putting the center of this gradient. Again, because this is a radial. If I set this to linear, then I'm simply deciding where is the end and where is the bluish end of that. Let me set this back to radial because that gives us some other interesting options. So right now, this is set back to 100 aspect ratio. Now, if you put your mouse pointer on the edge here, you want to get the mouse pointer looking like that little curved circle. So you have to move the mouse pointer around a little bit. Now, right now, as long as the gradient is in circular fashion, there's really no difference. But if we squash it, I'm going to put my mouse pointer on one of these handles and drag in so that it's kind of oval shaped. Now, when you get that little handle, you can move that oval. So you're doing really what you did in the gradient panel, except now you're doing it visually. You can also take this dot on the end and stretch it out. So that way the gradient is coming farther out. And there's nothing wrong with the gradient ending outside of the shape. That simply means that there's going to be more color inside the shape. Also, you have that little diamond handle. So this little diamond handle that we had there, you have in here, and you can drag that back and forth. You could also put your mouse pointer on the bar itself, and that's just another way of dragging the bar around. And in the panel, when we were dragging these two little sliders, these two little stops, those are in this bar as well. If you move your mouse pointer on the bar, you can see that little slider on one side, and you can move that. You have the other slider on the opposite side, and you can drag that as well. Okay, let's move this out of the way because I want to show you that you can also apply gradients to the stroke of the object. Let me just kind of shrink that. And I'm going to draw maybe a circle. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to either press D on the keyboard or click the little miniature thing here. And I don't want any fill right now. So with that fill up there, I'm going to click that little slash. And I'm just going to draw a circle. Just kind of like that. You can draw another shape if you like. And I'm going to make this thicker. I'm going to make this, let's say, maybe 10 or 15 points, something thereabouts. And let's also zoom in. And you can zoom in however you like. I'm going to press the letter X on my keyboard to bring my stroke color up to the front, and I'll click below the little slider ramp in the gradient tab to apply the gradient. Now, it's going to apply the last gradient that I used, so on your screen you may see a colorful gradient rather than a black and white gradient like I see here. And that's okay because we'll be changing the gradient colors in just a minute, so you can keep whatever gradient you have when you clicked. Or if you want, you can click on the white-black gradient in the swatches panel. Let me just deselect it so you can get a better look. I think that looks kind of neat. Applying a gradient to a stroke, let me select it so you can see these three different buttons. And you have three choices: applying a gradient within a stroke, along a stroke, or across the stroke. Let me explain what that means. When you apply a gradient within a stroke, that means the gradient simply starts at one edge and it goes all the way through to the other edge, kind of like the stroke is part of the fill. If you apply a gradient along the stroke, that means the gradient is going along the path of the stroke. And the third way, across, will simply start the gradient on the inside and go to the outside, or the outside and come into the inside. Let's apply some colors first. I'll click on the left-hand color stop, hold down the Option key or the Alt key in Windows, click a color. I'm going to click the other slider. I'll hold down the Alt key or the Option key, and I'll click another color. So now we have a nice gradient, and you could also apply opacity just like you did when dealing with the fill. Okay, so this one right here is gradient within a stroke. This is gradient along the stroke, so you see it starts off in one color and it gradually changes to the other color. And over here is across the stroke, and you see it's starting all around the circle, whatever spot on the circle you're looking at, and the gradient is starting on the outside and going on the inside, or vice versa. Applying opacity, we can get some kind of interesting effects. Here's gradient along the stroke, and I'm going to take this slider here, and I'm going to set, first the opacity, if I set that to 0, and you notice, let me just deselect for a moment, you see it's fading a little bit more. I can take this, maybe I'll set that to white, and I'll hold down the Option key or the Alt key, and now that's fading even a little bit more. I can even step that further. I'll take this little diamond handle and drag that to the left. So this looks like it could be a painting. That is, looks like you could be using an image editor like Photoshop. I'll select that and maybe Alt-click blue so you can get a better look at it. This is just formatting. If you take a look at Outline View, I'll press Command-Y, or you could press Control-Y in Windows, and you see this is just a plain old circle. Press Command-Y or Control-Y again. One last thing, and this is something you can do whether you're applying gradient to a stroke or gradient to a fill, is if you decide you want to reverse it, this little thing here will simply reverse your gradient. So as I said before, gradients are a lot of fun to use, or a lot of fun to play around with. You can spend hours doing it.